Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spectre here for another edition of Midnight Rider. Glad you could join. Looks like we're up across the board here. We got YouTube up, we've got Twitch up, we got DLive up, we got Tiger Network up, where it looks like we're up across the board. On the broadcast tonight, we're going to cover a couple things. We're going to get into the now heavily fortified Baghdad-esque D.C., Washington, D.C. area, all of the checkpoints and everything else that's been going on around there in the lead up to the 20th here. I'm going to cover a little bit of the big tech war on free speech as that continues, beating up on the little guys still. And also some of the goings on around the final hours of Trump's first term. So that's what we're going to get into here on the broadcast here tonight. And of course, we'll see you back here on the other side. Warning. These social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Alright, welcome back everybody. Like I said, we got a lot to get into here this evening. It's going to be quite an interesting ride. Again, we're going to get into a lot of the stuff going on around DC here this evening. The lead up, all the troop build-ups, the National Guard, whatever all is going on there. Get into big tech, the fallout still with the parlors, the gabs, you name it, the telegrams and whatnot. And of course, I wonder what POTUS is going to do by way of some pardons. Looks like he's got about 100 planned here in the last few hours here of the first term. And so, yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting. Dusker Hughes says, Spectre, not X-tagged? Nope. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, depending on which way you look at it, I'm not big enough yet to have gotten the demonetization, I guess, on DLive, but I suppose give it time. We'll have to see. Might speak too soon after tonight's broadcast, I don't know. So that being said, let's just get into it here. And so this evening, we'll start off with the Washington Examiner article. It says, the calm before the storm, uneasy quiet descends on D.C. and Congress ahead of the inauguration. This dates back a couple days here. But nonetheless, I thought that the headline was quite interesting because, of course, if you go all the way back to 2017, before the inception of the Anons and that were posting on 4chan at the time that came to be known as Q, Clearance Patriot, etc., etc. POTUS, obviously, even back in October of 2017, made reference to the calm before the storm. And of course, the press corps was perplexed at the time and says, what does this mean? And of course, he said, you'll find out. So, Washington Examiner says this, an uneasy peace has settled in Washington, D.C. with a week to go before Inauguration Day, and a week after deadly violence tore through Capitol Hill. Deadly violence. I love the language that they used. I should have remembered to grab the graphic here from this morning's article where it went through all of these various outlets and looked at the various terms in that they used. I think you guys would have been very interested in that. Congress is out of session until President-elect Joe Biden is inaugurated next week, meaning a couple days here. Buildings are boarded up across the city. The National Guard has descended upon the district, and President Trump no longer has an outlet, Twitter, to feed into the insatiable news cycle. One of the White House press pools reports from Thursday before the simple subject line, no news. The constant talk of elections, fraud, protests, and the Electoral College has given way to an eerie calm after the events of January 6, events which have left a poignant mark on the Capitol and will undoubtedly shape changes, some that are already being felt in the weeks and months to come. It says exactly 1 week after the Capitol Hill siege on an ever more fortified Congress voted on Wednesday to impeach Trump for a historic second time, House members had to walk through metal detectors to get to the floor as they voted, and after several GOP lawmakers refused to wear masks during the siege lockdown, members now must wear masks on the floor or stiff face fines. I wonder if that should have been reversed, face stiff fines, because I think Pelosi actually kicked out like $5,000 fines, if I recall correctly. Senior congressional staffer told the Washington Examiner on Thursday that the mood on Capitol Hill is entirely different and a little unnerving following the events of last week and the pause before members returned back to Washington. This is really the first time I've ever felt a little, I don't want to say scared, but a little uneasy about going back to work, the senior staffer said, noting that he has worked in various capacities on Capitol Hill for years. So I think we get the idea out of that one. Yes, definitely a uneasy calm, as it were. And, well, why? Well, all one has to do is take a look at the buildup of the National Guard, which today they had this tweet out, says, "We are honored to receive this mission during a time that our country needs us." As of this morning, more than 21,500 members of the National Guard were on the ground in Washington to assist D.C. and federal authorities through hashtag Inauguration 2021. And it follows up with an article that says National Guard troops head to D.C. from as far away as Guam. So there you go, folks. Last week I had talked briefly about the buildup of the National Guard back when it was 6,000 to 12,000, then 15,000, and then even had an article from a local outlet where I'm at, middle part of the country here, where we were sending brigades in for logistics and even religious support, surprisingly. This on the heels of New York also sending National Guardsmen, and also, I believe it was Puerto Rico also sending in Guardsmen. So there is quite a buildup, as it were. So that's what we're going to get into here for the next couple, 2-3 articles here. Out of Gateway Pundit here yesterday, FBI is vetting the National Guard troops in D.C. over fears of, quote, insider attack or threat from service members securing Biden inauguration. And one might have to scratch your head on that and say, why? Why would they be fearful of potentially an insider attack? Well, I was just reading something just before coming online here. I think it was out of Breitbart, and maybe it was out of the Mockingbird media, thinking that perhaps QAnon folks might try to dress up as National Guardsmen and somehow infiltrate, as if that were somehow possible. Ridiculous. Biden's camp is becoming increasingly paranoid after stealing the 2020 election. In the days leading up to the Biden inaugural, the nation's capital has been turned into an occupied military zone like Baghdad. In fact, there are more U.S. troops in the nation's capital today than in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan combined. Yeah, crazy. Armed U.S. troops authorized to use lethal force are manning checkpoints to enter and leave downtown Washington, D.C. Green zone and red zone perimeters have been established. Several bridges into the city from neighboring Virginia are scheduled to be closed next week for the inaugural. Razor wire top fencing has been erected around the Capitol and Supreme Court. Large swaths of official Washington have been blocked to vehicular traffic. And CCTV cameras were also installed so they can spy on the people they don't trust. According to NBC, U.S. defense officials are worried about an inside attack or threat from Guard members chosen to secure Biden's fraudulent inauguration. So the piece continues here. Says U.S. defense officials say they are worried about an insider attack or other threat from service members involved in securing President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration, prompting the FBI to vet all of the 25,000 National Guard troops coming into Washington for the event. Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy told the AP on Sunday that officials are conscious of the potential threat, and he warned commanders to be on the lookout for any problems within their ranks as the inauguration approaches. So far, however, he and other leaders say they have seen no evidence of any threats, and officials said the vetting hadn't flagged any issues. We're continually going through the process and taking second, third looks at every one of the individuals assigned to this operation. Operation? Wonder if this operation has a name. McCarthy said in an interview after he and other military leaders went through an exhaustive 3-hour security drill in preparation for Wednesday's inauguration. He said Guard members are also getting training on how to identify potential insider threats. About 25,000 members of the National Guard are streaming into Washington from across the country, at least 2.5 times the number for previous inaugurals. And while the military routinely reviews service members for extremist connections, the FBI screening is in addition to any previous monitoring. If Joe Biden needs 25,000 troops to protect his inauguration, and he's paranoid about an insider attack from those troops, perhaps he wasn't elected by the people. And of course, that's a piece by the Gateway Pundit, which has been very ardent of the goings on since November 3rd. If you followed any of my work, obviously you know that I've put together a trove of articles since November 3rd, north of 5,400 articles across many outlets, all of the evidence, which you can find over underneath my Gab side. Not sure if it's still pinned to the top or not, given Gab's having the issues ramping up, but nonetheless, we'll get it back up there shortly. That being said, News Punch continues and says D.C. turns into Baghdad for inauguration. Red zone, military checkpoints, bridges closed, and the like. It's pretty crazy when you look at it. Says just days before the Biden inauguration, the nation's capital has been transformed into a military zone like Baghdad. Armed U.S. troops are now manning checkpoints to enter and leave downtown D.C. Red zone and green zone perimeters have been created. Bridges into D.C. from neighboring Virginia are to be closed in the coming days, shortly before the inaugural. And there's a little bit out of the Gateway Pundit reports. Sean Spicer, President Trump's first press secretary and current Newsmax TV host, posted video apparently taken Friday night that shows a military checkpoint to leave D.C. near the Lincoln Memorial. The video also shows cars on 16th Street near K Street parked in rows, blockading the roadway. But first, a scene setter report by Spicer's Newsmax co-host Lindsay Keith from 16th and K in the daytime. So we'll let a couple of these play through.
Here on 16th and K Street, I just want to give you some perspective of the measures that are going into place to lock this city down. Not only can you see this fencing behind me, there's more fencing going up that you can see on the street here. We're just steps away from the White House here. One of the most interesting things that I've seen, not only are these barricades, but is if you can look down 16th Street as you're seeing right now, there is a whole block of government vehicles just parked to be used as barricades for this entire weekend. A military vehicle at the end blocking that with some National Guard troops. Expected to be 21,000 National Guard troops here in the Capitol. It's pretty desolate out here. A fortress would almost be an understatement at this point. Here on 16th and K Street.
So there you have it out of Newsmax in recent days. Spicer's nighttime video, we'll get into that here. I'll check this out.
You can actually jam down the street, because if you did, he'd still run into all these barricades. But literally, that's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this. Have a good weekend.
So I guess the question one might ask is who at this point would want to go into D.C. with that fortification and that around there and having to go through checkpoint after checkpoint. Another report on checkpoints to leave D.C. A friend just called me from his car in D.C. He was dropping his wife off at her office in NW Northwest. They had to go through an armed checkpoint to enter the city. Leaving the city, he had to stop at another armed checkpoint. He was required to show his ID, #unlike an election. Yeah, Get that. You don't have to show any ID to vote, but hey, to get in and out of the city, yes, you do. Chris Philby says, hashtag DC update. A friend just called me from his car. I guess that's the same one as we just covered. The video clip from RSBN had this.
And as you can see, everything's barricaded off. But man, about every block or so, there's these tents set up. It looks like a checkpoint area, perhaps, for tables where you would go through. But anyway, that's what's going on right now.
So video driving through a checkpoint manned by guard troops yields this. It doesn't look like that one wants to play all the way through, but nonetheless, you get the idea. A report by a construction early Friday morning, yet another one. Apparently that one must have been removed. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, 4 of the main bridges in and out of D.C. from Virginia will be closed for 48 hours around the inauguration. 2 bridges from Virginia to D.C. are not set to be closed. Key Bridge from Rosslyn to Georgetown and Change Bridge from McLean to Canal Road near the Palisades neighborhood. The tweet says here, David Shepardson says, jaw-dropping, more bridges closing from Virginia to D.C. Interesting. And there you see all of those various bridges being closed. The Secret Service posted a detailed list on Thursday of the streets blockaded by military checkpoints and divided into a green zone and red zone. The green zone, vehicle restricted zone, vehicle traffic restricted to residents or businesses within the restricted area. And National Guard personnel will be assisting with verifying traffic entering into the green zone. As for the red zone, street closures and vehicle traffic restricted to authorized vehicles only with proper vehicle placard. Extra checks are in place for those flying to D.C. Extra security for flights coming into D.C. Says I boarded a flight from LGA to D.C. a moment ago. This is at the gate. A TSA agent checked again all passenger IDs against boarding passes. Homeland Security officer with a dog was standing beside the door and said, yes, this is for inauguration. And that's where we see the tweet via Elizabeth Landers there. Also, airlines are banning guns and checked luggage on flights to D.C. area airports. Gee, that would probably go without saying. These restrictions and security checkpoints are supposed to be temporary just for the inauguration. Bonus video of our new Biden martial law normal. Teacher now teaches children in his military uniform.
It's recruitment time, and we got to get these kids knowing that, there's a stable teacher in place. They've already had a lot thrown at them through this virtual learning, shifts in their scheduling and stuff like that. So if I can provide some stability in that and let them know that I'm dedicated to their success musically and as people, I think that's going to go a long way. And so if I can do that at all costs, I'm in.
So there you have it. There's a little bit of a walkthrough of what is on the streets in D.C. As of the last couple days. Again, I can't imagine why anybody in their right mind at this point, perhaps maybe the Antifa BLM folks think that they'll be able to get through all this stuff unscathed. But I seriously doubt you would see any of the Trump-type folks wishing to go through all of that mess. Nonetheless, Gateway Pundit again says Biden inaugural, 2,000 National Guard troops in D.C. sworn in as special duty U.S. Marshals. Well, that's interesting. So, 2,000 National Guard troops in D.C. to protect the Biden inauguration this week have been sworn in as special duty U.S. Marshals. The move comes after reports that Guard members were being vetted over fears of an insider attack by troops on the inauguration. Photos of the troops being sworn by Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia, Lamont Ruffin, were posted online by the U.S. Marshals Service. And here we see a tweet via U.S. Marshals. Chief Lamont Ruffin from D.C. District Court swears in 2,000 National Guard troops as special duty U.S. Marshals prior to the upcoming presidential inauguration. There we see the pictures of that taking place. And so the caption for the Flickr album reads, Washington, January 17th, 2021. Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal Lamont Ruffin from U.S. District of Columbia District Court swears in 2,000 National Guard troops as special duty U.S. Marshals prior to the upcoming presidential inauguration. Deputation gives the Guardsmen temporary, limited law enforcement authority pertaining specifically to the safety and protection of the inauguration and related events. The nation's capital has been turned into an armed encampment with over 15,000 troops deployed who are authorized to use lethal force. That number is expected to grow to upwards of 25,000 troops later this week. Downtown D.C. has been divided into green and red zones, much as what we have already covered, with armed military checkpoints to enter and leave the zones. Nothing inspires confidence in government like politically vetted masked troops with permission to kill citizens being given police powers in the nation's capital in a ceremony in the dead of night. No sarcasm whatsoever on Gateway Pundit's behalf, but nonetheless, that's exactly what has just happened here today. And, of course, not to end the snarkiness, but, hey, chicks on the right add this as opinion. Well, Congress does support walls for themselves. And, of course, as an opinion piece, Jenny Kontrinsky over at Chicks on the Right says, well, it turns out Congress does support walls for security. Not for the security of the nation, mind you, but for their own security. A quote-unquote temporary wall is quickly being erected in front of the Capitol building following the January 6th breach. You see, the members of Congress are important enough to require protection. This much is clear. The safety and security of the American people is simply not important to them. And here we get a tweet from Greg Price. It's amazing how quickly the government can build a wall when it's our ruling class being threatened as opposed to small towns on the southern border. And so we'll let this play through. So yeah, basically a little draught setting up little parapet walls and that to funnel traffic and that where they need it to go. Back to the article here. It says, geez, they didn't waste any time building their wall, did they? NPR is reporting the wall will be up for at least 30 days. Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy announced Thursday that a 7-foot non-scalable fence is being erected around the entirety of the U.S. Capitol, and it will be in place for at least the next 30 days. McCarthy also said 6,200 members of the National Guard will deploy to the National Capital Region by the weekend. He made his remarks at a press briefing with Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and acting D.C. Police Chief Robert Conti. How much do you want to bet that this wall becomes a permanent feature around the Capitol? And just like that, the elite ruling class in Washington, D.C. became even more inaccessible, out of touch. Yep. So there you have it. A little bit of snarkiness in that out of Chicks on the Right, but very fitting, because at the end of the day, POTUS, Donald John Trump, was just down at the wall for the, 450th mile, right? And, of course, what do you think is going to happen if and or when somebody like Biden is sworn in? You think they're going to continue building that and protect the southern border? Oh, hell no. Of course not. That's not in their best interest now, is it? But to protect them? Oh, certainly, in D.C. All right. Well, switching gears up a little bit here, aside from the goings-on in D.C. and the inauguration, if we want to call it that, here in the next little over 24 hours. Back to the First Amendment shakedown artistry of the big tech folks. News Punch has got this to say. It says, former Facebook exec calls for OANN and Newsmax to be deplatformed. So, folks, it's not good enough that just Parler was taken down just because it was an alternative platform to Twitter and Facebook. No. They're going to force you to have to watch CNN and ABC and NBC and MSNBC and Fox. No, we can't allow for this dissenting opinion on One American News and or Newsmax. Former Facebook executive Alex Stamos has called for right-wing media news outlets OANN and Newsmax to be deplatformed. Stamos likened Republicans in Congress to ISIS supporters and argued that conservative voices like One American News and Newsmax should be quieted in order to return Americans to a consensual reality. Get that? A consensual reality. Not what really is reality, but reality in their minds, and you will just conform, folks. He even suggested that the media networks be banned for cable TV carriers during an interview with CNN on Sunday. We're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem, that these companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and such to be bringing them into tens of millions of homes. As if he's the sole arbiter of who gets to dictate what you do and don't get to see. Benny tweeted this out, says on CNN this morning, we have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN. Whoa, and so the truth is revealed. Then calls for at One American News and Newsmax to be deplatformed.
Now we're talking about domestic audience in the United States. And the challenge is going to be partially that ISIS did not have a domestic constituency in the United States Congress, but there is over half of the Republicans in Congress voted to overturn the election. And there will be a continual political pressure on the companies to not take it seriously. So I think first, you have to focus on those violent extremists, and those companies have to be brave in that way. And second, we have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these...
All right, that's about as much as I can stand of these nitwits on here. The Joseph Goebbels at work. Lovely, lovely clown news. RT reports Stamos, who is chief security officer at Facebook until August 2018, said press freedoms are being abused by bad actors that have an economic interest in becoming more and more radical. As Fox News fell out of favor with devout Trump supporters for some of its post-election coverage, which Stamos called introducing realism in its reporting, One American News and Newsmax outflanked Fox on the right and allowed viewers to put themselves into a sealed ecosystem, he argued. That becomes a huge challenge of figuring out how do you bring those people back into the mainstream of fact-based reporting and try to get us all back into the same consensual reality, Stamos said. He called for the same kind of collaboration between social media companies and law enforcement that helped stop ISIS recruitment on their platforms after he joined Facebook in 2015. But Stamos, who is currently director of the Stanford Internet Observatory, added that ISIS did not have a domestic constituency in the United States Congress. There's over half of the Republicans in Congress voted to overturn the election, and there will be continued political pressure on the companies to not take it seriously, Stamos said. He called for big tech to focus first on removing violent extremists, then turn down the capability of conservative influencers to reach large audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN, and they are extremely radical and pushing extremely radical views, Stamos said. So, it's up to the Facebooks and YouTubes, in particular, to think about whether or not they want to be effectively cable networks for disinformation. The call for aggressive deplatforming of conservative voices following a purge that's already seen the banning of the President of the United States and a coordinated takedown of the free speech Twitter alternative Parler was welcomed at CNN, which has already lobbied to push Fox off the airwaves in the wake of the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot. Oh, and just a reminder that neither Verizon, AT&T, nor Comcast have answered any questions about why they beam channels like OANN and Newsmax into millions of homes, CNN media reporter Oliver Darcy said. Do they have any second thoughts about distributing these channels, given their election denialism content? They won't say. And there we see the idiot Oliver Darcy. I'm not even going to bother reading that twink's tweets there. It's not even worth my spit. Darcy made no mention of the content at CNN and other mainstream media outlets, denying the legitimacy of the 2016 presidential election based on claims, without evidence, that President Donald Trump's campaign colluded with the Russians to win. The hypocrisy just knows no bounds, folks, at all. And it's extremely enlightening and quite funny to find out that, yes, indeed, there are many YouTube channels out there that have much larger audiences than your puny communist news network and whatever crap that you guys spill out. Continuing on that thread, Parler CEO, they want to kill me and my family. This out of the CEO in recent days. Parler CEO John Matz said he now fears for his family and his family's life following death threats and security breaches at his home. According to a shocking new court filing submitted on Friday, Matz and his wife and young children have been forced into hiding after credible threats were made against their lives. The death threats come just days after Parler launched an antitrust lawsuit against Amazon after the big tech giant shut off its web services following last week's riots on Capitol Hill. Amazon filed a response claiming the lawsuit has no legal basis and alleged its employees have been faced with threats and harassment. The filing from Parler's lawyers acknowledges the disturbing claims made by Amazon, but note that the Jeff Bezos company is not the one receiving threats. Although AWS's motion to seal focuses only on its own employees, Parler's employees have been similarly harassed and threatened, the filing states. Parler's CEO, John Matz Jr., reports in his declaration in support of Parler's TRO, temporary restraining order, motion, that many Parler employees are suffering harassment and hostility, fear for their safety and that of their families, and in some cases have fled their home state to escape persecution. The filing continues. Matz himself, as a CEO of the company AWS continues to vilify, has had to leave his home and go into hiding with his family after receiving death threats and invasive personal security breaches. FoxNews.com reports, earlier this week, Matz told Fox News about the various threats he has received and the measures he would take to protect his family. There is a group called UG Nazi that is targeting me, Matz said, noting the controversial hacker group has released many of his passwords and personal information on the internet. They published my street address. They threatened to come through my front door. He usually doesn't take threats directed at him too seriously, he said, but this time he's gone into hiding with his family. He isn't sure when he'll return home, saying he's taking things day by day, but thinks being away from his usual routine amid the chaos surrounding his company could actually be having a positive impact. It's probably leveled me out, Matz said. If I was at home right now, I think my stress levels would have been like 3 times higher. At least there is that saving grace. So, again, the price you pay for free speech, folks. And of course, if you turn against big tech, they're going to try and squash you. We've been through it before, just as we have with Gab here 2 years ago, if you remember right, back when the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting took place. All of that stuff happened at the very same stuff that is now taking place with Parler. Andrew Torba and company have had to come back and build better and through and around them. And that's, in my opinion, what I think Parler is likely going to have to do. So, that being said, continuing on the thread of big tech, obviously people have been migrating to Gab, they've been migrating to Telegram, they've been heading over to various other platforms. Now that Parler has been de-platformed, we get this out of Gateway Pundit. It says Signal messaging app crashes after massive number of new users, tens of millions of new users just this week. And this dating back to the 15th now. But you can imagine, and for those of us on Gab, we've had some of the growing pains as we've had to wait for the influx of 750% increase and the addition of servers net, because it's all their own equipment and whatnot, of having to deal with that. Signal app is the latest alternative app to crash on Friday. Signal is the latest app struggling to keep up with the massive growth they are experiencing. And here we see via tweet Ken Klippenstein says, if you're wondering why Signal is down, might have something to do with their installs increasing from 10 million to 50 million since January 12th. And there it says how it started versus how it's going. We've seen very similar measures in that out of Torba in recent days, so I can appreciate their growing pains. It says Signal posted about their struggles on Twitter. Signal is experiencing technical difficulties. We are working hard to restore service as quickly as possible. We have been adding new servers and extra capacity at a record pace every single day this week, non-stop. But today exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Millions upon millions of new users are sending a message that privacy matters. We appreciate your patience. They continued on, says, we are making progress towards getting the service back online. Privacy is our top priority, but adding capacity is a close second right now. So, short article in that regard. Yes, people are flocking to more friendly First Amendment related platforms that appreciate that. Obviously, look after your privacy, don't wish to sell your data, etc., etc. And of course, along with Gab, every single one of these platforms is having to gear up. And last but not least, in the tech realm, we get this out of Great Game India. It says, forget WhatsApp. CIA has tools to hack almost all social media platforms. So think back here, right? Parler was deplatformed. The very next day, we got an article about some hackwad that decided to lift the information out for, I forget what it was, maybe the last 24 hours around January 6th. Basically mined all that data, I forget how many terabytes of data this thing was, in order to try and frame folks and look to see how many people were congregating there and planning their attacks, if you will, on the Capitol, right? And so guess what? The CIA can do you one better. And we kind of already knew that. Recently, after WhatsApp updated its terms of use and privacy policy, users have been migrating to other social media and messaging platforms due to concerns of their privacy. However, what is not being reported by media is that the CIA has developed tools which can hack not just WhatsApp, but bypass the encryption of Signal, Telegram, Weibo, Confide, and Cloakman by hacking your smartphones itself. So yeah. If you think you're protected via encryption on all of these, guess what? If you're doing that on a smartphone, well, there's a little bit of a workaround. And here we see kind of the structure of the CIA, the cyber weapons development, according to WikiLeaks. For those who recall, way back when, 2017, I think, is the date on that particular tweet. It says WikiLeaks Vault 7 confirms CIA can effectively bypass Signal, Telegram, WhatsApp, and Confide encryption. And it kind of gives a layout of all of the various breakdowns in their org structure there. This is on March 7th, 2017. WikiLeaks released a giant file of 8,761 documents from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, codenamed Vault 7. WikiLeaks called the leak the first full part of the series, Year Zero. The documents were stolen from a network that supposedly was isolated within the CIA itself. The files included details on CIA's software capabilities, such as the ability to compromise cars, smart TVs, web browsers, and the operating systems of most smartphones, as well as other operating systems such as Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. A CIA internal audit identified 91 malware tools out of more than 500 tools in use in 2016 being compromised by the release. It says the leaks outlined how the CIA could pretty much hack into any device with a suite of tools designed to read and copy data from electronic devices. The documents detailed how, for example, authorities found a way to bypass encryption in a host of secure messaging apps such as WhatsApp and Telegram. The CIA's Covert Hacking Division had found a way to bypass vastly popular end-to-end encryption apps used on phones to prevent hacking and spying. This was accompanied by hacking the smartphone first. The code would run in the background and collect all audio and text message traffic before encryption was applied through the apps. And here again, we see the structure of the CIA cyber weapons development according to WikiLeaks. The Directorate of Digital Innovation, the Center for Cyber Intelligence, their engineering development group down into their network devices branch. I don't know what the SED stands for, but the AED is the Applied Engineering Division and all the various groups underneath that. So what this means is that apps like WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram, hugely popular because of their security features, were vulnerable. People using these apps could still be spied on by the CIA. By the end of 2016, the CIA's hacking division, which formally falls under the agency's Center for Cyber Intelligence, had over 5,000 registered users and had produced more than 1,000 hacking systems, Trojans, viruses, and other weaponized malware. And I think that is pretty well the end of that article. Here we go. Yep, these techniques permit the CIA to bypass the encryption of WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Weibo, Confide, and Cloakman by hacking the smartphones that they run on and collecting audio and messaging traffic before encryption is applied. According to WikiLeaks, once an Android smartphone is penetrated, the CIA can collect audio and message traffic before encryption is applied. Some of CIA's software is reportedly able to gain access to messages sent by instant messaging services. This method of accessing messages differs from obtaining access by decrypting an already encrypted message. While the encryption of messengers that offer end-to-end encryption, such as Telegram, WhatsApp, and Signal, wasn't reported to be cracked, their encryption can be bypassed by capturing input before their encryption is applied, by methods such as keylogging and recording the touch input from the user. So there you have it, folks. Even though many of us are getting on various other platforms, be cognizant that yes, if you are doing this via a smart device such as an Android or even Apple iPhone, chances are there are keyloggers net out there, so nonetheless, be careful what exactly it is you are transmitting across these platforms. All right, well, continuing on this evening, as if it's not bad enough that our communications can not only be hacked and stolen and everything else, but obviously they want to prevent us from even being able to talk about certain things. They want a memory hole, everything about the election and its fraudulence. And so we get this out of Natural News. Democrat Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor, you do not have the right to say election was rigged. It's not protected free speech. So there you go, folks. You can't say it. It is banned. You will get flagged. I mean, all one has to do is look at Facebook and what they've implemented. Anything that used to have the old hashtag stop the steal, gone. Doesn't exist. Been memory hold. Forget about it. Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman on Friday said President Trump does not have the right to say the election was stolen. And this plays off an article out of the Gateway Pundit. It says, according to Fetterman, saying the election was stolen or rigged is not protected under the First Amendment. Au contraire, mon frere. Perhaps maybe you need a little lesson on the Constitution. The idea that saying that Pennsylvania was rigged or that we were trying to steal the election, that's a lie. And you do not have the right. That is not protected speech, Fetterman said. Democrat Fetterman said Trump only has the right to talk about his favorite football team, but he does not have the right to say an election was rigged. Fetterman is a typical Democrat Marxist. He wants to criminalize speech he doesn't agree with. And here we get this misfit. We'll let him play through.
So this idea that saying that Pennsylvania was rigged or that we were trying to steal the election, unquote, that's a lie. And that you do not have the right. That is not protected speech. The second those tweets went up, they should have been deleted. That's not deplatforming someone. It's deleting lies that are yelling fire in a crowded theater when there is none. And there's a difference. That is not protected speech. He can talk all day about what his favorite football team is or that he's the greatest president in the history of the world. But no one, Republican, Democrat, whatever, has the right to say those kind of incendiary lies. So this idea that saying that
bullshit. I mean, excuse me, I had something in my throat there. Yeah, this buffoon apparently thinks that only his line of thinking is the only acceptable line of thinking, and there are and should not be any opposing views. Ridiculousness, reject that, and mock him mercilessly. Heads up, Pennsylvania Republicans. Fetterman this week announced a possible U.S. Senate run. Oh, dear Lord, help us. We're exploring the race, Fetterman confirmed to KDKA. We're talking about it. We're taking a look at everything, and that's honestly where we are at. So, of course, they want to put more of their kind in Congress. These guys are extremely emboldened at this point. They think they're on cloud 9, and they're just going to browbeat, not only POTUS, but 75 to 80 million folks into submission. And I unfortunately beg to differ. You are not going to win this ideological fight. As far as I'm concerned, get on a plane, march your happy ass down to Venezuela or Cuba, and just take you and your kind with you. So long. Alright, switching gears up a little bit still. Breitbart had this to say here, and of course this plays right along with everything that has taken place with the election, the infiltration and that we have had here with the China types. Schweitzer says Mitch McConnell, wife Elaine Chao, financially tied to the Chinese government. Well, there's a no-brainer. We'll let just a little bit of this play through.
Welcome back. We're joined now by a good friend, author of Profiles in Corruption, president of the Government Accountability Institute, and indefatigable swamp investigator, Peter Schweitzer. Peter, I've been saying that Mitch McConnell represents everything that's wrong and broken with politics and government. You've really looked into this. Tell us more.
So before we jump into that, I'll just remind folks here too, by the way, old Mitch is compromised. For those that don't know, perhaps you might want to go through and actually do a little bit of digging on what happened in his various districts for this past election. What you'll quickly find out is that, guess who else benefited from the Dominion voting systems? Oh no, it wasn't just the Dems, but guess who? Oh, Mitch McConnell. Why, yes, indeed, he had a few counties in that were very, very questionable himself. So, consider that.
Yeah, I mean, really, it goes to the fact that Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chao, his wife, are financially tied to the Chinese government. And it comes through the shipbuilding company that Elaine Chao's family owns. That relationship was forged in December of 1993 when James Chao, Elaine Chao's father, Elaine Chao, and the new son-in-law, Senator Mitch McConnell, visited Beijing, China at the invitation of the China State.
So yes, of course we know all of Mitch's ties, especially into the Chao family, which is extremely wealthy. And of course, if, anything were to happen that goes against anything that has to do with China that could be negative, obviously some of that wealth would just go bye-bye.
Shipbuilding Corporation. This was a coup to Beijing because Tiananmen Square had happened just 4 years earlier. Very few high officials went there. The result of that meeting and the deals that followed is that today the Chinese government finances the construction of the ships for the shipbuilding company. They build the ships, they provide the crews for the ship, and they provide the cargo for the ship. So the Chinese government could pull the plug tomorrow on this business. And the reason they're doing business with them, let's make it clear, is because Mitch McConnell is a very powerful figure in Washington, D.C.
And that's about all you need to know about that. That'll continue on for about another minute or two, but I think we get the idea. Breitbart News senior contributor Peter Schweitzer on Sunday detailed how Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his wife Elaine Chao are financially tied to the Chinese Communist Party. Schweitzer said on Fox News Channel's The Next Revolution that McConnell's position on China has softened over the years, which he argued is due to the growing relationship between the Chinese government and the Chao's company. Really, it goes to the fact that Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chao, his wife, are financially tied to the Chinese government, Schweitzer outlined, and it comes through the shipbuilding company that Elaine Chao's family owns. That relationship was forged in December 93 when James Chao, Elaine Chao's father, Elaine Chao, and the new son-in-law, senior Senator Mitch McConnell, visited Beijing, China at the invitation of the China State Shipbuilding Corporation. This was a coup to Beijing because Tiananmen Square had happened just 4 years earlier. Very few high officials went there. The result of that meeting and the deals that followed is that today the Chinese government finances the construction of the ships for the shipbuilding company. They build the ships, they provide the crews for the ships, and they provide the cargo for the ship. So the Chinese government could pull the plug tomorrow on this business, and the reason they're doing business with them, let's make it clear, is because Mitch McConnell is a very powerful figure in Washington, D.C., and the problem is, Steve, that his position on China has softened over the years, the closer that his commercial relationship has become, and he's a direct beneficiary of what his business does. According to Schweitzer, this is the strategy of the Chinese government across the globe. They seek out political elites and give them commercial deals, Schweitzer stated. They are wedded to the Chinese, he added. They don't want to anger the Chinese because they could destroy their families financially. So there you have it. And continuing along that thread, as far as China is concerned, we get to one of the bombshells and that came out today. Really not that much of a surprise, but out of Zero Hedge, China sought to influence the 2020 U.S. election, Director of National Intelligence assesses. And this is penned by the Epoch Times. Zero Hedge picked this up, says Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe assessed that China interfered in the 2020 federal elections, according to a letter transmitted to Congress. In the letter, Ratcliffe alleges that intelligence about China's election interference was suppressed by management at the CIA, which pressured analysts to withdraw their support for The View. Citing a report by the intelligence community's analytic ombudsman, Barry Zuloff, the director of national intelligence said that some analysts were reluctant to describe China's actions as election interference because they disagreed with the policies of President Donald Trump. Shocker, right? And so, the Washington Examiner published Ratcliffe's letter and the ombudsman report on January 17th, 10 days after publishing an original report on the documents. The ODNI didn't immediately respond to requests from the Epoch Times to authenticate the documents. Based on all available sources of intelligence, with definitions consistently applied and reached independent of political considerations or undue pressure, that the People's Republic of China sought to influence the 2020 U.S. federal elections, Ratcliffe wrote. The report by Zuloff was sent to Congress on January 7th, alongside an intelligence community assessment of interference in the 2020 election. In the report, Zuloff states that the analysts working on Russia and China applied different standards to the reporting on election interference. While labeling Russia's activity as clear election interference, the analysts were reluctant to do the same for China. Gee, I wonder why. Think back to the article we just covered. How many other folks in some of these agencies have very similar ties, or perhaps are set up in very similar situations to the old Swalwells? Got a little honeypot on the side, perhaps. Given analytical differences in the way Russia and China analysts examined their targets, China analysts appeared hesitant to assess Chinese actions as undue influence or interference, Zuloff wrote. These analysts appeared reluctant to have their analysis on China brought forward because they tended to disagree with the administration's policy, saying, in effect, I don't want our intelligence used to support those policies. Neither the Ombudsman report nor the letter from Ratcliffe includes details on China's meddling. Zuloff redirected an interview request by the Epoch Times to the ODNI, which didn't immediately respond to an emailed request. The analytic ombudsman's report assesses that politicization occurred in relation to both Russia's and China's election interference. Zuloff assessed that neither intelligence community leaders nor analysts are at fault, blaming the hyper-partisan atmosphere in the United States instead. Oh, you mean the everybody out to get Trump coup attempt? Maybe. In most cases, what we see is the entire system responding to and resisting pressures from outside. rather than attempts to politicize intelligence by our leaders or analysts. The report states that the analysts who assessed Russia's election interference had complained that the intelligence community management was reluctant to deliver their assessments to government clients because the work was not well received. Analysts saw this as suppression of intelligence, bordering on politicization of intelligence from above, Zulauf wrote. The Epoch Times previously documented a multi-pronged election influence campaign linked to the Chinese Communist Party. In a December 3rd op-ed, Ratcliffe said the CCP poses the greatest threat to America today, and the greatest threat to democracy and freedom worldwide since World War II. The intelligence is clear. Beijing intends to dominate the U.S. and the rest of the planet economically, militarily, and technologically, he wrote. Many of China's major public initiatives and prominent companies offer only a layer of camouflage to the activities of the Chinese Communist Party. Congress certified Joe Biden as a president-elect on January 7th. In the 2 months leading up to the certification, Trump challenged the outcome of the election in 7 states, citing unconstitutional changes to election laws and potentially illegally cast votes. And that was via Ivan Penchikov over at the Epoch Times reporting. And so, what do we get? Well, we're down to the final hours of the first term of Donald John Trump. And so, either tomorrow or perhaps maybe early hours on Wednesday, we're probably going to see some pardons. And Trump plans 100 pardons for Tuesday. The question is, will Assange be among them? And if you thought that these guys were running around like their heads were cut off like chickens, especially Nancy Pelosi trying to get support from the military, even though she has no business doing so. If you think putting somebody like Assange back on the streets, a free man, would scare the living bejesus out of him, well, I'd say rip the Band-Aid off. Let's do it. President Trump is expected to issue a long list of pardons and commutations on Tuesday, according to several sources who spoke to, Clown News. President Donald Trump is preparing to issue around 100 pardons and commutations on his final full day in office Tuesday, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. A major batch of clemency actions that includes white-collar criminals, high-profile rappers, and others, but, as of now, is not expected to include Trump himself. The White House held a meeting on Sunday to finalize a list of pardons, 2 sources said. The president had issued a number of pardons prior to Christmas, but his final large list is said to have been finalized in a White House meeting on Sunday. Some of them may be controversial to say the least. For example, Steve Bannon. But currently, still dominating the news are those arrested in the wake of the Capitol Hill mayhem of last week. Senator Lindsey Graham addressed this on a Sunday news show, telling Fox there are a lot of people urging the president to pardon the folks involved in the rioting. To seek a pardon of these people would be wrong. This coming from somebody like Lindsey Graham? Nonetheless, but the biggest name said to be under possible consideration is a WikiLeaks Julian Assange, subject of a major independent and social media campaign to lobby for his full pardon and release from a London jail where extradition proceedings are still ongoing. Will President Trump pardon Assange? That is the question of the day. Sky News had this via tweet, says Pamela Anderson says Donald Trump is debating pardoning Julian Assange. And, of course, if you recall here, back in December, November time frame even, I think old Pamela Anderson put some fairly provocative tweets out there and holding signs much to the same degree of trying to influence getting Mr. Assange out of jail, as it were. Says even if Assange's name isn't among the current list of 100 expected to be pardoned, it's theoretically possible Trump could do so even on the morning of January 20th, just ahead of Biden being formally sworn in as president. And Kim.com had this to say, says 100 pardons from Trump tomorrow. I hope Assange and Snowden get a pardon. They are the most important truth tellers of our time and deserve to be treated with dignity. Please bring those shameful episodes of U.S. bullying to an end. Still, Trump is expected to leave the White House on January 20th and could issue pardons up until noon on Inauguration Day, according to CNN. So, as I typically like to conclude the show with, let's finish this. I think we're about to witness some very, very interesting hours here over the next coming days. So it's going to be very interesting to watch play out, certainly. So that being said, appreciate you guys tuning in here this evening. A little bit of a walkthrough of some of the goings on around the Capitol. I'm sure business will certainly pick up tomorrow. There's tons of other news net out there, obviously, but I can only bring you so much in a little over an hour's time or whatever I'm running up to here now. But nonetheless, we'll have more to say here in the next day or so. So stick around. We'll see you back then. And of course, as always, be sure to like, share, subscribe across all the platforms. And we'll see you back here on the next one. Take care and God bless everybody.